everyone. Welcome to another edition of Spilling the Tea on GovCon. I'm Teresa Moon, Director of Business Development for Parabolis. We provide a better financial partnership for government contractors that includes a line of credit to fund your growth. The purpose of this podcast is to assist small businesses with success in the federal marketplace by introducing them to industry experts and resources that they may not otherwise know about. Today, my guest is Paul Veeneman, Senior Solutions Architect for Blue Ridge Networks, Inc. I connected with his company through a mutual acquaintance and found very quickly that they have distinct value propositions that illuminates their core capabilities, and Paul is a wonderful representative for their forward-thinking initiatives. I'm so happy to have you join us here today, Paul. Thank you.
Great to be here, Teresa. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. If you wouldn't mind, take a few minutes to share with our audience your professional background, how you came to be where you are today with Blue Ridge, and discuss some of the core competencies of Blue Ridge Networks, please.
Okay, sure. So I've got 28 years of experience in a lot of different industries. So healthcare, finance, manufacturing, engineering, and enterprise infrastructure. So it could be local, regional, international. I entered into kind of a lot of what we're talking about today is Blue Ridge by way of engineering and supporting freight rail, so critical infrastructure within the United States, and specifically freight transportation, supporting three of the largest Class 1 railroads and their water, wastewater, bulk electric, sanding systems, oil systems, et cetera. Rail yards, in some cases, could be a lot like small cities in municipalities in many respects. And it was looking for solutions to be able to isolate, segment, and conceal while also allowing encryption authentication for control systems environments that I happened upon Blue Ridge and entered into a relationship with the organizations, first as a partner and a solution provider. And then over the last 6 or 7 years, as that relationship has progressed, I've had the opportunity to work with the organization at various levels, solution architecture, product development, and much of the outreach and evangelism as we're doing today. And that's where we're at today. So thank you.
That's awesome. And I appreciate that introduction. I always like to give our guests the opportunity to level the playing field with everyone that's listening. And cybersecurity is at the forefront of everyone's minds, but not everyone knows what that means to them, right? And that's why we had you come on today, because when I met you and was introduced to the topics that we'd be talking about today, it's very, very important to small and growing government contractors to understand why it's relevant to the way that they do their business and
Right.
how they can incorporate certain things into their practices that can help mitigate some risk. So I want to dive right in because we've got a lot to unpack here and you've come prepared. Today, we're going to be talking about making sense of the cybersecurity world and the priorities necessary for small to medium-sized businesses. So with that in mind, let's talk about what's wrapped up in the term cybersecurity, right? And what are best first steps businesses should take on the journey to achieving cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's interesting because you had kind of touched on it when you had said mitigating those risks. And when folks ask me if I'm at a conference or even clients, other organizations, or even colleagues and counterparts, they'll ask that same question, like, what is cybersecurity? Well, that's a big thing, right? So you can be on the governance and compliance, it could be policies, procedures, it could be layered defense, incident response teams, et cetera. What I feel cybersecurity really is the output of our risk mitigations, right? And what is the first step that organizations should do? And it's actually in the tagline for Blue Ridge Networks, protecting critical assets and data. So we have to be able to understand what are the assets within an organization. Asset can be an individual, could be a process, could be a service. Any type of function that furthers the goals, missions, and objectives of the organization is an asset to the organization. The severity of the loss or the compromise of that asset is where we get into the risk mitigation or applying certain cybersecurity functionality, features, or capabilities. So it could be procedural. This is when we're operating within a particular framework of the organization or a business unit or what have you. These are the steps that our assets, the personnel, will execute. It could be a functionality or technical control, as it could be called, and that could be multi-factor authentication against your login accounts, right? So now we're getting into, I'm the individual, my account is my name, my password validates that I am who I am, but we want that second level of validation to that. So organizational controls, which could be more or less how the organization governs itself. And that could be your risk tolerance level that's identified by the management team at a very high level, where the rest of the organization determines how to mitigate risks to assets within the organization that are critical to its operation and function, and thereby reducing risk to an acceptable tolerance level. So that's what cybersecurity means, and it's economies of scale, whether it's a small organization, a large organization, or even an MSP supporting folks along that spectrum.
Okay, great. And we're going to get into MSP in a little bit as well, because I've got a question about that for you too. But I love the way you broke it down, because you talk about it in certain different levels of achievement for that cybersecurity term itself. And I think that's the biggest misconception for small businesses, because they don't realize that it has to be on all of those levels in order for you really to be compliant,
Right.
especially when we're dealing with government contractors, especially those that are dealing in the defense realm and have DoD contracts. And so I know you guys have a special expertise to that. So those of you who are listening today that have that as a part of where you are doing business, these are great experts in this field to be able to help you get in compliance on all levels, not just CMMC, because in the government contracting world, that's the buzz term right now, but it really is on all levels, internally and externally. So I'm glad that you touched on all of those, and not like I'm an expert, but you really break it down in a way that's palatable for those of us that don't know a lot about it from a technical standpoint. And so I appreciate the way that you've described it. I think if I'm able to follow along, I think a lot of who are listening today will grab onto a lot of that as well. So, you know, a lot of what we are going to talk about today, people are recognizing it more than ever, because there have been a lot of breaches and cyber attacks that are very well publicized, that have been in the headlines, right? Can you give a couple of examples of where these entities may have missed out and why or how they became vulnerable?
What's interesting, one of what's probably top of mind, especially in the healthcare field, is it's recent within the last few months, but United Health Group, but more the Change Medical Business Unit, right? So everyone's heard about the ransomware incursion, or the $22 million ransom fee that they had to pay, the qualitative and quantitative costs that came along with that. And there was an exchange on LinkedIn coming off of a dark reading article on the impacts of cybersecurity and ransomware and those impacts. And one of the things is, what's the due diligence that should be taking place with organizations? Are we doing the things that are necessary? And a lot of times, I always like to start off with telling folks is hackers don't generally hack in anymore, they log in, right? So 98% of the threat vectors that are available, email is chosen as a threat vector. 36% of the time, email and phishing as a threat vector is successful. And usually an incursion takes about 295 days in order to identify and even take action against it. So it's a lot of time that a threat actor has to move around. Mm-hmm. And so as we're looking at where do organizations miss, I think it's on the basics. And even at Blue Ridge, we put a lot of emphasis on getting back to basics and understanding, where do we need to start out? What are the little things that we need to do? And that's where, and you had touched on it, there's a lot that's coming at us, even from a small business perspective, as to all of the cybersecurity things that we have to do on a daily basis to either meet, contractual obligations to the DoD or DOE or whatever government institution or agency that we're working with. Mm-hmm. And we lose sight of what are the little things that we can do even to protect the organization itself, right? So it's not so much what are my contractual obligations, but as a business owner or as a manager, administrator, or practitioner within the organization, what can we bring about to ensure the long-term viability of the organization of the company? And in the case of Change Medical, is due diligence on what are the things missing at the time of the acquisition for UHG, what were those vulnerabilities, and were those vulnerabilities mitigated, or was it put on some sort of a plan of action and milestones or a corrective action plan? Did they take the necessary steps to shore up those areas of vulnerability that led to compromise, infiltration, exfiltration, et cetera? But it's always, a lot of times, if you look below or get past or read between the lines on the newsreels, you'll find that everything gets back to, did we isolate or segment networks? Did we close off open conduits and ports on the internet? Did we have multi-factor authentication against login accounts? Did we practice least privilege and standard access versus privileged access? And are we doing all the auditing and monitoring and logging on a continual basis? But it's usually, like those 4 or 5 things that organizations can do to help prepare themselves, or at least be in a posture to mitigate the risk or
Mhm.
to reduce the impact if something were to happen. Because bad things happen to good people, right? I mean, when your number's called on a particular day, you hope that you've got enough in place where if I haven't mitigated the risk or the potential, then at least do I minimize the impact or the severity.
Right. And, I think it's interesting to note as well, if this is happening to big companies like United Healthcare, this is going to happen. And a lot of people take it from, well, what do they want from me? I'm just a little guy. Well, more often than not, the little companies are the easiest ones to get into because they're the least
Right.
protected. If it can happen to UHC, it's going to happen to a smaller company even easier. I mean, I like I said, from a technical standpoint, I don't have a lot of background in that. But from a practical standpoint, being involved in business, especially within government contracting or in businesses that keep a lot of personal information. I worked for a staffing company for years.
Right.
You've got,
Right.
social security numbers and driver's license numbers, all kinds of key information that people can utilize to really hurt you personally. And even from employment standpoint for a small company, you're keeping your W-2s or W-4s, first, the information that they're giving you from an employment side. If you're not storing
Hmm.
that properly, not only are you at risk for the business, but you're at risk at exposing everyone who works for you as well, because you do keep these types of materials and sometimes they are kept electronically. And so it isn't to scare everyone. The first step to making a change is recognizing that there's an issue, right? And
Right.
to your point, bad things happen to good people. I've actually read that book and I recommend it. It's very short. I think the key is to recognizing on all levels how you can protect yourself. And it's not just a dollars and cents thing. It's common sense, right? We know that there's a threat and it's there present every single day, personally and professionally. Your personal computers can be affected equally as easily as your business equipment. And so I think
Correct.
that it's important for people, no matter how small you are, no matter how many employees you have, you're vulnerable if you're not putting certain things in place. And, from a business owner's standpoint, I'm sure that information on that, or engaging with managed service providers, right? So regarding MSPs, what do businesses
Hmm.
need to be cognizant in that area as well? Because that's different. If you wouldn't mind letting people know, basic understanding of what an MSP is, why would you employ something like that? And then where do they need to be aware?
Right. So, an MSP or managed service provider is essentially an outsourced IT department, right? So their goal is to keep the blinking green lights blinking green and not red. The the scenario for an MSP is to come to a small medium business, right, and be able to be the point of contact for all things technology. So you're a business owner, you have the goals, missions, objectives of your organization. Is that to be an IT department? No, it's to maybe an outsourcing firm or an accounting partner to larger organizations, but you're fulfilling some sort of a need. And any cycles that you're wasting on technology, specifically like a printer's not working, or somebody's Outlook email isn't functioning properly, or Excel doesn't come up, it crashes every time, and maybe there's an update or something. Well, the MSP is there at typically a monthly rate with add-ons or whatever it would be. And it's always applicable to the number of personnel, the number of workstations or laptops, printers, copiers, assets that you have. And then you have this monthly cost. And for that monthly cost, they take care of everything. And a lot of times we want to find that to be at or commensurate with what an IT department would be. But now you're not responsible for that. You've outsourced the responsibility to that third party. The issue comes, and specifically with, let's say, department contract or a government contract and
Mhm.
CMMC, is am I certain that all of the objectives that I have contractually for upcoming CMMC, once the proposed rule becomes a final rule, there are going to be things that I'm not myself, I've outsourced responsibility to the MSP. They may be in charge of audit and accountability or log review or log monitoring. They may be in charge of my MFA, as we talked about before. They may be in charge of account and access. So that could be access control, identification, authentication, these areas. As a small business owner or medium business owner, I want to make sure that I have a very clear, transparent relationship and line of communication to my MSP so that they're aware of these are the requirements that I have, and I'm outsourcing that responsibility to you. Now, we take like a RACI chart, so responsibility, accountability, consulted and informed. as a small or medium business owner, I can outsource the responsibility of a capacity or capability, but I cannot outsource the accountability. So I'm still ultimately accountable because I'm the one that has that contract with a government agency or a
Mm-hmm.
contracting agent.
Mm-hmm.
But I can outsource the responsibility. What that means is in that relationship, I don't get to play dumb when something comes up where the question is asked, hey, who's responsible for this? And I say the MSP, and then I just point to them and I have this confused look on my face. I need to understand that myself and the MSP have had to articulate, a very detailed discussion about where are the shared responsibilities. That's where our shared responsibility matrix comes in, is where do those shared responsibilities lie, and in what are the responsibilities that the MSP is taking on, and are they aware of those things so that they can answer those questions affirmatively, accurately, and confidently.
I mean, that's great because I think a lot of people misunderstand that. And I know, we've talked several times with other companies on the show about CMMC compliance and how it trickles down to everyone that you're working with as well. So if you're handling classified information, it's going through your IT, right? I don't know, even know if I'm presenting it the right way. Whoever's controlling that for you better be in compliance as well. So because that could inhibit your ability to keep participating. And I think that's the crux of what businesses that probably are listening to this show are listening to, is if that is going to affect your ability to continue doing business with the different agencies that are employing you right now, then it's good to look into whether or not your MSP is currently in compliance with it as well, or if they plan to be. Because if they're not doing enough business with government contractors, they may not be looking at that compliance factor. You may have to look for a different provider for that.
Right. I think there's a lot to be said there, Teresa, and I think you hit the nail on the head, right? What is it that my MSP is really taking off my plate, and are they doing these things effectively and correctly? And if they're not, then I'm ultimately responsible for that. And is it a hindrance to be able to continue forward within the defense industrial base and have those contracts? The other thing is, if you take a look at, and I often mention this because there's and I know the term burden is usually misrepresented or overused, especially in the CMMC space, and it can be also a very provocative and polarizing word, the burden on the defense contractor. But at the very least, if you take a look at the subset of most of the controls within SP 800-171, and we talk about the impact of ransomware, multi-factor authentication, least privilege, encryption at rest, encryption in transit, monitoring, and incident response, a lot of these things are things that could protect small, medium businesses from ransomware itself. Understanding how we log into our email accounts and being aware of what phishing is, and having cybersecurity awareness and training so that our staff is aware of, this email doesn't quite look like a valid email. I think there's something going on here. And whether I have internal IT staff or external outsourced MSP IT expertise, I'm sending that email to somebody, hey, can you take a look at this? I think this is somewhat suspect. That is the human capital that we have within, trained human capital who are cyber secure aware, to be that first line of defense or that AWACS against threats that are sitting at the edge of our networks attempting to get in and compromise us. But whether it's meeting the CMMC requirements and objectives for my contractual obligations, or doing these things for a safeguarding of my own organization and its critical assets, I think those two are one and the same.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's super important for people to not parcel them out from one another. It's a joint venture there. And that's a term that a lot of people that are listening right now understand very clearly. So let's move along to some of the things that people overlook, right? What do you think are the biggest disconnects or misunderstandings that you see when it comes to cybersecurity for these small businesses that are paying attention today? What do you think that they're overlooking?
I think a lot of times it's whenever somebody takes a look at, let's say, the NIST. So within CMMC, I think by now a lot of folks have had the opportunity, especially small business owners, either being exposed to or reading through the NIST documentation themselves. And what I run into a lot is the interpretation of what a control language is supposed to be. The NIST language is nebulous, right? And so it takes you have to have someone who has the ability to interpret that, to apply it to the organization, their technology. If there's an MSP, to be able to work with the MSP and say, here's what this says, here's what this is. But I think a lot of times, speaking to government contracts and the contractual obligations, it's a misinterpretation. And a lot of times it's optimism versus pessimism.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is what the control language is saying, and we meet these objectives. And you actually want to be more restrictive and more prohibitive rather than less restrictive or less prohibitive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a misstep is usually misinterpreting. And that's the whole reason for CMMC, is because self-attestation previously didn't work. And that was a lot of it. It was that culture of optimism versus pessimism. I also think that what we said before, we get so hit with so much marketing on all of the things we need to buy, purchase, and subscribe to in order to protect, like these layers upon layers of cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're really missing is getting back to basics and understanding what is it that I have and what is it that I need to protect. And as a small business owner, I would want to say, what is core? And I think it's the good to great and the queen bee. And what are the core functions within my organization? And how is technology attached to that?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know small or medium businesses that isn't ultimately dependent on file storage, whether it's cloud or local, and email and communication. And now even our voice communication is ubiquitous with data transport, right? We're not really using landlines as much anymore. So I think it's making sure that we understand our authenticate. A big miss is typically multi-factor authentication, because it can be seen as a time suck. Why do I have to authenticate every time I want to get into the browser or access my OneDrive or access my email? Because if I remove convenience, if I remove a level of convenience for the organization, I'm also removing the level of convenience for the threat actor that could compromise my account, log in, and exfiltrate data. And I think that's something very important to remember. I had the luxury of learning that very early on in my career, probably within the first 5 years. I was working with a bank. I don't think they had so much the title of a chief information security officer, but it was definitely a very security savvy CIO. And we were talking about the layers of protection that were in place. And I said, wow, this is really a lot that you've architected here. It's quite comprehensive. And he says, and he got a very stern look. And he says, if it's convenient for us, it's convenient for them.
Yep.
And that phrase has never rung more true than today. And that would have been, 20, 25 years ago.
Wow. I mean, it is so true. And I think there's little things that we can do that can help even the smallest of companies. And MFA is one of those first steps, obviously. And it is a pain in the neck, right? You got to wait for a text or an email to come through so you can do it.
Right.
I mean, even on your Gmail accounts, they're doing it now. It's obvious, because that can alert you if someone else is trying to do that. Then
Absolutely.
You're getting the alert at the same time too. And phishing scams are so prevalent these days. I would say that there's not one person listening right now that hasn't had something. I mean, almost every employer I've had in the last 10 years has sent me an email asking me to purchase gift cards. I think
Correct.
That's the most prevalent one, right? And, there are certain things that you can look for, but without proper training, I think cybersecurity training for employers and then to trickle down into their employees, super important as well, so that they're not welcoming in a threat that they just don't know. I think this has been a great conversation in understanding the basics and understanding how it applies to the crux of the people who are listening right now. I'm going to encourage everyone to reach out on your website and look into scheduling a consultation with you all, because I think that there's a lot to be learned to see where you guys can step in and help them. Like you said, start with the basics and then branch out from there. You're not asking them to build too quickly. You're asking them to just figure out what it is they need to preserve and then start building a foundation upon that. And I think that's reassuring too. It isn't about the expense. It's about really making sure that you're securing the ability to keep doing business, because that can be lost really quickly. And so very much appreciate that. I very much appreciate your time and your expertise here today. Like I said, I encourage you all to reach out to Paul on LinkedIn, check out their website. And I hope this leads to more time to have you on, because there's more things that we could be talking about that delve into other parts of your expertise. So I think I might have you back on again soon. I hope you'll oblige.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful time, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you and also provide a starting point or a foundation for the audience and those listening as well.
Absolutely. This is very eye-opening, so everyone pay attention. We appreciate everyone joining us today. As always, we pride ourselves on sharing the most insightful and exciting people and information to help you better navigate your GovCon journey. If you like what you heard today, you can see all of our past podcasts, which are archived on our YouTube channel by the same name. Stay tuned for all of our future guests in the coming months as we help you grow to great heights this year ahead. I'm Teresa Moon, and this is Spilling the Tea on GovCon. Have a great day, my friends.